Hello and welcome to PFF Wire. I'm Doug Kyed, joined as always by Brad Spielberger. Brad, we're coming in here a little bit early on Friday. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. Yeah, a little early for the people, but big slate ahead of us. Actually a good Thursday night football game for the first time in maybe forever. So things are trending up.
Definitely a little bit unexpected. Texans were pretty competitive in that game. We'll probably talk about that a little bit later. But let's get into our first segment, fresh off the wire. First biggest piece of news for the week as of today: Jonathan Taylor out week 9 with that ankle injury. Deion Jackson expected to start in place of Jonathan Taylor. They've also got Zach Moss, who just came over from the Buffalo Bills. Not sure how fastly he can get acclimated to the Colts offense. But yeah, I mean, if Deion Jackson's out there on your waiver wire, I'd certainly try to pick him up. And as far as DFS is concerned, probably slot Deion Jackson in on those lineups because we saw what he could do as a pass catcher, catching 10 passes in week 6 when Nyheim Hines was out. So he's got some pretty solid every down value as far as this game is concerned. Not sure how much his workload will be, but a little bit concerning that this ankle injury is lingering for Jonathan Taylor at this point.
Obviously, he's a super durable player. Did have a ton of usage in college at Wisconsin, and maybe some of that's finally cropping up and catching up to him a little bit. But for the most part, been extremely healthy as you can possibly be at this position. My biggest takeaway is kind of it adds a little context to the situation between Nyheim Hines and the Indianapolis Colts, that they probably had a good idea Taylor may not be available for this game, and still moved on from a guy they just extended last offseason, their number 2 back, who, like you said, was injured, but in the game he did play, they had Deion Jackson, they had Phillip Lindsay, they had other guys getting touches. I don't think he was appreciative of his workload, and it's probably why he's now a Buffalo Bill.
Yeah. No, I think that was definitely a solid aspect of that as well. And I just think that, I don't necessarily know if the Colts have given up on the season, because I still think that the AFC South is fairly wide open. The Titans are definitely the cream of the crop there. I think they're sitting at 5-2 right now, 6-2, whatever it is. But I think that turning to Sam Ehlinger at quarterback, now trading away Nyheim Hines, I don't really think the Colts should necessarily have playoff implication or aspirations this season.
I mean, like you said, you should never count it out. It's not a good division. Now, the Titans are 5-2, but I said this on Sunday. They've beaten Davis Mills, Matt Ryan twice. The other two, Derek Carr and Carson Wentz. There's their 5 wins. So congrats to them on beating 5 of the worst quarter. Well, Carr is supposed to be good. It hasn't been good this year, but anyway, there's a reason they're 12.5 point underdogs against the Kansas City Chiefs this weekend. Another 5-2 football team, a different 5-2 football team. So it is tough, though, with the Colts having those 2 losses to the Titans. It's going to be hard to, pass them in the division. And then the wild card is obviously going to be super competitive in the AFC. But, yeah, I mean, I think maybe not giving up on the year, but maybe more value in just seeing what you have in all these young players, letting them get some experience building up. And, hey, if you do sneak in as a wild card potentially or win the division somehow, Titan, Ryan Tannehill gets re-hurt or something like that, a little bit of gravy.
Yeah, it is interesting to see how the Colts sold off on Nyheim Hines. Jacksonville Jaguars traded away James Robinson and made a plan for the future by bringing in Calvin Ridley. So, yeah, that division's kind of wide open, but teams were still sellers at the NFL trade deadline. Let's talk about 2 wide receiver injuries: Rashod Bateman and Michael Thomas, both out for the season. Rashod Bateman having the Liz Frank surgery, Michael Thomas having a toe surgery. Let's get in the Bateman injury first, I guess, because this is really unfortunate timing for the Ravens after having just traded for Roquan Smith. Seemed like they were kind of going all in for this season. They were, I think, the 3rd best team in the AFC in PFF's latest power rankings. I think that you could probably, them and the Miami Dolphins are kind of right now the most competitive for that 3rd spot in the AFC. But now losing Rashod Bateman for the season when they've got James Prochet and Devin Duvernay and Demarcus Robinson as their next best wide receivers, I think that they're right up there with the Green Bay Packers now at this point as the teams that could use a player like Odell Beckham Jr. the most, or the teams that, if Brandin Cooks gets released at some point by the Houston Texans, which I don't know how likely that would be, like they desperately need that type of player now at this point.
And it's not going to just be Deshaun Jackson, who obviously is working his way into the lineup. I think, look, Will Fuller may have retired, may not love football all that much. You probably still give him a phone call. T.Y. Hilton, his agent tweeted out the ghost emoji. This is like a month ago at this point.
Yeah.
But, I think he's probably still available, interested in football when healthy, which has been kind of the issue. He was good last year. He's still a good player when he can keep those hamstrings, firing and going well. So, they have to add more. They do, because also Mark Andrews, not 100%. You do have the good backup in Isaiah Likely, but it's just you make a trade. I mean, a big time trade, a second round pick for Roquan Smith. You're trying to make this push. I agree with you. I think they are the third best team in the AFC. The division looks great for them now. Cleveland and Pittsburgh really kind of not out of it, but not looking good. And Cincinnati, we saw them without Jamar Chase this past week, and it did not look good. So It's an opportunity for them to really make a push. And if you don't have receiver talent, even given their offense is obviously unique, and there are a lot of 12 personnel, 2 tight ends, 13 personnel, 3 tight ends, all of those things, even in consideration, it's not enough talent. You're not beating Buffalo and Kansas City with their wide receiver group.
Yeah, definitely not. And obviously, like you mentioned, like they've got other options in their offense to use. They've got Patrick Ricard. They've got Isaiah Likely, like you mentioned. Clearly, they've got Mark Andrews, and Gus Edwards is banged up right now and everything as well. They've got Nick Boyle. But if you're putting Nick Boyle and Patrick Ricard on the field, then like those aren't guys that you're throwing the ball to. Like they could run, I guess, what would it be? A 23 offense with Patrick Ricard and Gus Edwards, and then Isaiah Likely, Nick Boyle, and Mark Andrews on the field. And those are probably their best skill position players at this point, if you're being honest, but you're just not going to move the ball through the air using those types of players. So I don't know. Yeah, I think, like you said, call up Will Fuller, see if he wants to come back, monitor the Brandin Cooks situation. It doesn't seem like a Kenny Golladay cut is very likely at this point. I think, would the Giants still lose cap space, even if it's a post-June 1 cut, by cutting Kenny Golladay at this point?
Yeah, I would imagine so. I don't have it in front of me, but yeah. Probably. Especially if it's not a trade. If it's but again, no one's picking him up on the waiver wire. I think maybe it's the last potential opportunity. A guy like Tyler Johnson, I think he did go back to Tampa Bay, but teams are and Houston was trotting out, you and I at wide receiver last night. They still cut Tyler Johnson, so probably make that joke too much. But anyway, there are other options. I think maybe we see more roster cutdowns. They have to be active in that market, add whatever they can. I think Devin Duvernay is like a good number 3 wide receiver. I think James Prochet is like a good number 4 wide receiver. When they're your 1 and 2, it's a problem.
Definitely. Do you think, not to stay on this topic for too long, but do you think that if they had known that Bateman was going to need season-ending surgery, do you think they make a move at wide receiver before the deadline?
It's a great question, and you have to think they had at least an idea it was on the table, right? I mean, he's been out for a couple weeks now at this point. I know he played in the Thursday game, but very quickly left that game, and he already came into it not 100% healthy. So it's a good question. Would they maybe use that capital they got for Roquan Smith and instead went after a wide receiver? It's certainly a fair question, something they had to have considered. Or they just want to play bully ball and take their shot at just playing a completely different, operate. They did add, Demarcus Robinson when he got cut down by, whoever. So they've explored it, but I think you need more there.
We've got some very confident Ravens fans in the comments here. E-Man says Robinson will be the number 1 behind Andrews. Quote me. We did. I just quoted you. And we've got Drake Holiday who says Demarcus Robinson and Djax got to show out. Duvernay is actually really quite good. We will take your word for that. All right. So Michael Thomas also out for the season. Not a whole lot to do with that. Brandin Cooks did not play on Thursday night against the Philadelphia Eagles, but Lovie Smith said that he would be back with the Texans as of Friday. Seems like they're at least trying to make things work there, but I don't know. I mean, if Brandin Cooks isn't happy and if he sees an opportunity out there, joining potentially the Green Bay Packers or the Baltimore Ravens, I don't know. If I were him, I might continue to cause an issue.
The thing here is everyone's obviously going to go to the Odell Beckham Jr. situation in Cleveland last year. How they're different is Odell had no guarantees remaining beyond that current season, and he did take a minor pay cut in that current year from Cleveland, basically kind of bought his way out and knew he was going to get a near minimum deal from Los Angeles with a bunch of incentives that he earned because they obviously won the Super Bowl. But with Cooks, I mean, it's an $18 million fully guaranteed salary for 2023. I get it. Maybe you want to go play in a contender. You're now 29 years old. You're on a 1-6-1 Houston team. that you feel disrespected by, but it's a different situation. I mean, he may have to forego a ton of money, and as much as it almost would be cool to see a guy like, I love football that much, I care that much about it. His agent probably would beg him not to do that. It's very different. It's not like the Odell Beckham. It would take almost maybe a team saying, hey, we will extend you or we'll sign you to a multi-year deal if you do this, which is frankly tampering, whatever. But he would need to have assurances that there is something else coming down the line. Otherwise, it's the biggest gamble, biggest risk. I mean, we've seen in a long, long time from a player.
Definitely. As far as Odell Beckham Jr. goes, obviously we just discussed him a little bit. Joe Shane, the Giants GM, was talking about him earlier this week. I forgot exactly what day it was, but he said that they've been in contact with his agent, that they've been monitoring that situation. But then he said something like, if he's healthy, in 4 weeks, 5 weeks. So I think that we're still looking at a pretty long timeline for Odell Beckham Jr. coming back. I do think that, talking about Odell Beckham Jr. with the Packers, that timeline might be too far out to actually help the Packers. We'll see what they even look like at that point. We'll see if they can even make the playoffs at that point, because they've been struggling so much. The Ravens, I assume, given the rest of the talent on that team and how they've been performing so far, I don't know if Odell Beckham Jr. would want to join the Ravens, but that seems like between those two teams, maybe a better fit for the Ravens and the Packers. And obviously you've got to consider the Giants and the Bills and the Bucs and all these other teams for him as well.
It's funny. I've been looking at the schedules of the next month because I do think December is most realistic. Look, he tore his ACL, February 1st or whenever the Super Bowl was. 9 months would be December. He did come back fairly quickly the last time to Cleveland and was playing at a pretty high level, pretty much as soon as he returned. He obviously rehabs hard and is, one of the greatest athletes we've seen in a long time. Right. But with Baltimore, they could be 7-3. They go to Monday night at New Orleans. Not necessarily a guaranteed win, but a winnable game. They are favored on the road. And then it's a bye week. Then it's Carolina, and then I think it's Jacksonville after that. I think Denver. I mean, they could be 8-3, 9-3 when he's making that decision. They could sell him on. Look, we are gonna make the playoffs. We're gonna maybe win the division. Maybe, I don't know, based on schedule, maybe try to get that bye. Number 1 seed based on how things. Look, Buffalo's got to play Miami again. New England is never a guaranteed win against anyone. The Jets have a good defense. Anyway, there are further more challenges and of course, Kansas City, in the AFC West. That I'm sure it's on their radar. It should be on his radar because, that could be he can make the biggest impact, I should say, potentially by a decent margin playing for the Baltimore Ravens.
Absolutely. All right. Let's get a word from our sponsor. PFF Wire is sponsored by Western and Southern Financial Group. While you focus on your roster moves, Western and Southern helps advance your money moves. Buying your first home, planning to start a family, wondering how to make your money grow. Western and Southern's playbook of life insurance, investment, and retirement solutions helps you rest assured on game day. Team up to understand needs and address goals with a game plan built just for you. Get started at westernsouthern.com/PFF. Let's get into fantasy news and notes. Kick it off with the Chargers, favored by 3 points against the Falcons. Point total in this one, 49.5 points. Chargers wide receiver Keenan Allen was not practicing yesterday with a hamstring injury. Mike Williams also not practicing with an ankle injury. Running back Austin Eckler limited with an abdomen injury. Wide receiver Josh Palmer was practicing it in full with a concussion. And on the Falcons side, cornerback AJ Terrell was not practicing with a hamstring injury. I don't know about that point total when the Chargers' top 2 wide receivers both likely won't play. Running back Austin Eckler banged up. Justin Herbert probably going to be throwing to Josh Palmer and DeAndre Carter and Michael Bandy. That AJ Terrell likely won't play with that hamstring injury after not practicing the first 2 days of this week. But I don't know. Chargers are just having really tough injury luck this season.
They certainly are, and also doesn't help that those corners were, even more important because they really can't generate much of a pass rush. And so losing AJ Terrell and Casey Hayward, they obviously traded for, Rashad Fenton from the Kansas City Chiefs, who is a good player, but of course, hard to get up to speed that quickly, but a good outside corner. But it's the fact that Herbert should have a lot of time. An issue, and the reason why he's checking it down to Austin Eckler, in 2 seconds, behind the line of scrimmage 100 times a game is not just because Joe Lombardi loves to not throw the ball down the field, apparently, but also because, there have at times been protection. It's a good line, but obviously some injuries like Rashawn Slater at left tackle, they've shuffled things around in the interior a little bit. So that I think plays into it. My reason for not liking it, because I agree with you, actually the other side, even after all the investments they made this offseason, bring in Sebastian Joseph Day, who has been good, bring in Austin Johnson, bring in a lot of interior beef, they still are just not good against the run. I mean, they've early down EPA per play against the run is not good. Just general EPA per play against the run this season, nowhere near where you'd want it to be and expect it to be. It remains a major issue. And if anyone can take advantage of that, it's obviously this Atlanta Falcons team and head coach Arthur Smith, who just continues to run the ball down everyone's throat in a very creative fashion and do a lot of great things there. So that's going to burn clock, though, right? It might lead to scoring, but it also might burn a lot of clock if he just is confident I can run the ball, stay ahead of the chains the entire game, maybe keep Justin Herbert off the field as much as possible. And so that could lead to lower scoring as well.
Yeah, I'm a little surprised that the Chargers are favored by 3, I guess, in this one as well, just because they have not been that good this season. Falcons have been a little bit better than expected. Next game here, Dolphins favored by only 4 points in Chicago against the Bears. Point total is 45.5. No super notable fantasy injuries in this one, but I don't know. I mean, with the way the Dolphins are playing, I kind of like taking the points in this one.
Biggest note here, and this isn't a Tua Tagovailoa joke, even though it kind of is. There are very heavy wins expected Sunday at Soldier Field, and I think that is a huge variable. Of course, that affects both quarterbacks, but again, not trying to be funny. When you lack zip and velocity on your pass, it's probably going to be impacted more than if you're a quarterback that can maybe kind of muscle some balls through that air. So I think that is a huge factor. It's apparently 15-mile-an-hour sustained winds with 25-plus-mile-an-hour gusts, and that could even get worse before game time because earlier in the week, the forecast was that it was going to be okay, and it's gotten worse kind of every single day. And, obviously, Chicago, it can get really bad kind of at Soldier Fields on the water, in a location where wind can be a variable. So I think that's the big key here because otherwise I agree. I mean, the mismatch – Mike McDaniel attacking over the middle of the field is going to be a problem for Chicago. They've had struggles in the slot this year. They've gotten better. Kyler Gordon, the young rookie, has gotten better every week. Jaquan Brisker is a good young safety already. Eddie Jackson has 4 interceptions. They've done well, but you lose Roquan Smith now, right? So you have Nicholas Morrow and whoever they ultimately decide to start there. I don't think AJ Klein, underrated. They did add a linebacker in that trade. No one really talked about it. Does he start? Does Jack Sanborn, their undrafted free agent, start? Kind of a question mark there. But I think McDaniel's going to take advantage of that. But the wind, I think, is the ultimate kind of how does that impact everything, in this game.
Definitely. All right, next matchup here. Carolina Panthers at Bengals. Bengals favored by 7.5 points. Point total is 42.5. Panthers running back Chuba Hubbard out with an ankle injury. Wide receiver Jamar Chase for the Bengals also almost certainly out with that hip injury. There's a lot of lines this week that I'm looking at and kind of scratching my head a little bit. I know that the Panthers are the Panthers, but they kept it close last week against the Atlanta Falcons, and the Bengals looked like complete trash without Jamar Chase on the field against the Cleveland Browns. So 7.5 points, it just seems a little bit high in this matchup, especially with such a low point total of 42.5.
Good note there at the end there, right? Yeah, when you see a low total and you're supposed to cover this larger number. I mean, my thing is Chidobe Awuzie is, was playing like a top 10 cornerback over the last year and a half of football. That's how good he's been in Cincinnati. He's now out for an extended period of time, maybe the full season. Eli Apple already gotten benched at some point. And then Mike Hilton
out.
Who's one of the best slot cornerbacks in the NFL as well. A really, really, really good player. So you have, Cam Taylor-Britt, their second-round rookie from Nebraska, will play a lot. Sounds like Daxton Hill, their first-round pick, who's been more playing a safety, only played, I think, 45 snaps in the entire season. Obviously, Von Bell and what's his name? The other safety, the franchise tag fella.
Jesse Bates.
That guy, Jesse Bates.
Fella.
They have a phenomenal safety duo, but, he still hasn't played a lot. So he's apparently been practicing as an outside corner. Yeah, I think it's a lot of points. Carolina did move the ball pretty effectively against Atlanta. I wouldn't be laying over a touchdown on Cincinnati either.
Yeah, Deontay Foreman will be a surefire start in fantasy once again this week if you got him in your lineup, and certainly a good play in DFS as well. I think on DraftKings he was around $6,000 or so. Next up, Packers only favored by 3.5 points in Detroit against the Lions. Point total in this one is 49.5. Alan Lazard dealing with a shoulder injury. Aaron Rodgers was limited with a right thumb injury. Wide receiver Christian Watson limited with a concussion. Then on the Lions side, wide receiver Josh Reynolds was not practicing with a back injury. Running back DeAndre Swift, I believe, was limited with a shoulder and ankle injury. And tight end Brock Wright limited with the concussion. This Packers team, I think I saw the most recent thing was that Alan Lazard was going to be a game time decision in this game. So it could be, Aaron Rodgers once again throwing to Sammy Watkins and, Romeo Dobbs and maybe Christian Watson if he can return from that concussion. Lions are just so unpredictable at this point that I don't really want to touch them. You don't know which Lions team or which Lions offense or which Lions defense is going to show up on any given day.
It is a scary one. I mean, I think trading TJ Hawkinson, maybe you look at it both ways. Does it motivate and galvanize guys and say, look, they just moved on from a top 10 pick. I mean, we better start playing better because literally no one is safe in this building. And look, Houston played a good football game last night. They did kind of at the end, Philadelphia pulled away, but they were in that game for the most part. Yeah, but, Hawkinson not able to chip on Rashawn Gary and do some things as a blocker, but then also, of course, be a receiver. Swift said today, I'm probably not going to be 100% healthy at any point this season, even if he does play, basically admitted that he is not fully healthy. So, yeah, it comes down to kind of a motivation thing. I thought there was a cool note from Tej Seth on our podcast on Sunday that, Green Bay actually has struggled a lot against man coverage, and Detroit runs man coverage as much as anyone. But when you're that bad talent-wise, it might not matter. So, So can this be the week where, Green Bay kind of is able to actually overcome that just because of the lack of talent on their side? I would lean Green Bay here because their offensive line's gotten healthier. The Lions cannot generate a pass rush. Love the guy with that video of Aiden Hutchinson getting one arm blocked by Teron Armstead that was going around Twitter. Wasn't the greatest look in that game. But anyway, I would lean Green Bay to finally have a true get-right game here. But the Lions' motivation is definitely scary.
Next up, Colts, Patriots. Patriots favored by 5.5 points at home against the Colts. Matt Ryan obviously not playing with that right shoulder injury. Jonathan Taylor obviously not playing with that ankle injury. And then on the Patriots side, fantasy-wise, wide receiver Devontae Parker almost certainly won't play on his knee injury. And Damian Harris was limited on Thursday with an illness and then was not spotted at practice on Friday due to that illness. If he's not playing, then obviously that raises Ramondre Stevenson's value quite a bit in fantasy. This is another one where I might not want to touch just because the Patriots have been so unpredictable this season. They lose to the Bears. They had a pretty, commanding win over the Jets on Sunday. I know what I was saying about the Colts not having Jonathan Taylor, trading away Naheem Hines, starting Sam Ehlinger, but I just feel like you don't know which Patriots team is going to show up week to week at this point.
Yeah, you mentioned Justin Fields. I mean, Ehlinger is not Fields, but he can use his legs as a weapon. And when they play so much man coverage in New England, they're turning their backs to the offense. And a guy that can scramble, it's what Justin Fields did that entire football game. So I actually did take Indianapolis plus 6.5. I feel like an insane person for betting against Bill Belichick with Sam Ehlinger at quarterback. But I did, and it's moved, in my favor. But yeah, so it's again either a stay away or maybe get other bets. But yeah, who knows what to expect in this one.
40.5 points. That's pretty low in that game, but you can't really blame them with these two offenses. Next up, Bills favored by 11.5 points in New York against the Jets. Point total is 46. Bills cornerback Tre'Davious White was activated off of the PUP list, but I'm not sure if it's a guarantee that he will actually play on Sunday. For the Jets, Corey Davis is out with his knee injury. And I'd probably take the Bills in this one. Zach Wilson really seemed to miss Corey Davis last week against the Patriots. He's that guy that you can kind of throw the ball up to, hope that he comes down with that 50-50 ball. If Tre'Davious White doesn't play in this game, then I do like Garrett Wilson in DFS. His price is pretty low. I think it's like 4,800, something like that on DraftKings right now. And he's a big play threat. Like, you just need to get the ball in his hands. He might make a big play happen out there. And there's just not a lot of other targets on that Jets team beyond, I guess, Tyler Conklin that Zach Wilson really seems to like to throw to.
Yeah, no question about it. Outside of scripted plays, Corey Davis has more targets than Wilson and Elijah Moore by a wide margin. It's the guy that Zach, in a pinch, looks to. I don't really get the total here personally. I think both offensive lines have a massive disadvantage against both defensive lines. Yeah. Just so many injuries. I think Buffalo Bills right tackle Spencer Brown may play again, but their offensive line is good, not great, right? It's not bad. It's not a problem, but it's not, a juggernaut. And this Jets defensive line, has been really, really good. So for that side of the ball, and then of course, Zach Wilson, all we've seen there, they're going to struggle against this Bills pass rush as well. So I see more of a, kind of the Buffalo-Baltimore game that was 23-20 when it ended. That's kind of more the game I see here. So I like the under 46 in that game.
Here we go. Vikings favored by 3 points in Washington against the Commanders. Point total here is 43.5. For the Commanders, Jahan Dotson has not been practicing on that hamstring injury, and tight end Logan Thomas has been limited with the calf injury. Commanders have been playing pretty well with Taylor Heineke at quarterback. I know the Vikings are hot at 6-1, but if you've checked out the teams that they've beat, it's not a very convincing 6-1. I'm not convinced that the Vikings are going to win this game in Washington, even after acquiring a guy like TJ Hawkinson.
It is the homecoming, the revenge game for Kirk Cousins, which is a fun and interesting narrative. But no, I see it the same way as you. Again, I did bet them. I took them on our Sunday show. Said I would take the Commanders in this game. It's not a good mismatch. It's not a good matchup. So we talked last week when Arizona was playing against Minnesota, how Kirk Cousins really struggles with interior pressure. I mean, Jonathan Allen and Daron Payne might be the best interior duo or one of them in the entire NFL. J.J. Watt had 2 sacks of Kirk Cousins last week. It caused him problems. I don't think T.J. Hawkinson will be able to play a ton and make a big factor in this game. Tight end is so hard to figure out with your pass protection responsibilities, even though I do think Kevin O'Connell is going to put him in the slot more and use him as more of kind of a true receiver. Like, Tyler Higbee's not really blocking a ton. He's a good blocker. He's not like a special blocker. He's more, kind of getting split out every once in a while and doing some different things. So eventually we'll get there, but I'm not sure we're there yet with TJ Hawkinson. I like Washington in this matchup. The Heineke experience rolls on.
Next up, Raiders favored by 1.5 in Jacksonville against the Jaguars. For the Raiders, Matt Collins dealing with a heel injury, Darren Waller dealing with that hamstring injury, and wide receiver for the Jaguars, Jamal Agnew, dealing with a knee injury. It's another one where I kind of like the Jaguars in this game. That's a high point total for the Raiders only being favored by 1.5. But, I mean, the Raiders got shut out last week. The Raiders, I know that everyone coming into the season, myself included, expected the Raiders to be much better than they are this season. But, I mean, we've got half a season almost at this point to see that they are not the team that everyone expected them to be. One other note for DFS, Travis Etienne, over the last 2 weeks on DraftKings, has over 50 points. He got 28.2 points last week, 22.9 the week before. His salary on DraftKings right now is only $6,300. And, I mean, he's a guy who's putting up, like, elite running back fantasy points. Raiders' defense is not very good. So, if you're on DraftKings, throw Travis Etienne into your lineup for the week.
Oh, they're not good. They trade away Jonathan Hankins, kind of the run stuffer, nose tackle for them, have some young guys playing more snaps. They don't really cover running backs well in the pass game, and that is a big part of Etienne's game as well. Not great safety play, not great linebacker play either. The reason I like Jacksonville as well in this game is the reason I bet the Saints last week. I think they have a mismatch on both sides of the ball in the trenches. So maybe even crazier than the Raiders getting shut out and Devontae Adams having 1 catch for 3 yards. The Raiders had 2 pressures of Andy Dalton in that game. And the Jaguars' offensive line is not as good as New Orleans, but they have 2 solid tackles. Cam Robinson, Juwan Taylor's playing better football. And the interior, obviously Brandon Sheriff have good players there. So I think there's a mismatch there. And then Josh Allen, Javon Walker getting better each week. But I think they're better on both sides of the ball. So I tease Jacksonville with another team, with Seattle, we're about to talk about. But yeah, I would lean Jacksonville in this game as well.
Next up, Seattle against the Cardinals. The Cardinals are favored by 2 points over the Seahawks. Point total is 49.5 for the Seahawks. Marquise Goodwin was not practicing with a groin injury. Tight end Noah Fant limited with a hamstring injury. Both wide receivers, Tyler Lockett and DK Metcalf, full go. And then Cardinals running back James Conner was limited with a rib injury. This one feels like it should be probably more of like a pick'em, I'd say, between these two teams. The Cardinals secondary is pretty rough. And Geno Smith having DK Metcalf and Tyler Lockett, both another week healthy. I keep talking about DFS. Looking at my lineup right now, Geno Smith only $5,800 on DraftKings right now, going against that Cardinals secondary with both of his wide receivers. That seems like a smart play there.
It's almost so good it's scary, right? It's a little bit of a fishy spread, and I don't want to, overcorrect. I did not believe in Seattle until a couple weeks ago, and I finally raised my hand and said, all right, it's not fluky. They're better than I thought. I was wrong on them coming into the season. I haven't done that yet with some other teams, but I've acknowledged that, and I think it's a little weird that they're like you said, probably closer to a pick'em. I mean, it is kind of a pick'em when you add home field advantage, which is now about 1.5, 2 points. But even still, that's why I tease them with the Jacksonville Jaguars. I think the key you mentioned, neither guy's 100% healthy, but DK Metcalf and Tyler Lockett were good enough last week against a solid Giants defense. Adoree Jackson's been a good corner this year. there's not a player as good as Adoree Jackson on the Arizona Cardinals right now. That to me is the big one, and I lean Seattle as well.
I am stacking Geno Smith and DK Metcalf, by the way, in a lineup this week. All right, next up, Rams, Buccaneers. Buccaneers favored by 3 over the Rams. Point total is 42.5. Rams wide receivers Van Jefferson and Cooper Kupp, both limited. Running back Cam Akers back in practice for the Buccaneers. Tom Brady did not practice on Thursday, but it was just rest. As far as I believe Russell Gage is out this week with a hamstring injury. Tight end Cameron Brate also out with a neck injury, and Mike Evans dealing with an ankle injury. These are two teams that, and basically anything to me could happen in this game. Like the Rams could look like themselves again. The Buccaneers could look like themselves again. One thing I would say is that I know that neither team's offense has been both offenses have been extremely disappointing this season. I might consider the over on that point total. 42.5 for the Rams and Buccaneers seems mighty low.
Yeah, I think it all comes down to Cooper Kupp, right? Because without him in this lineup, their offense struggles to do much of anything. I should say, Allen Robinson back-to-back weeks with his most catches of the year, with I think about 60 yards in both games. So, and I also saw per our main account as the most targets in the red zone of any team. Like they are trying to get him involved, trying to score the ball with him, let him win in the ways he does, and he does much better against zone than man. He can find soft spots. He can get open. He's struggled to separate against man coverage. The Rams literally play off the ball 10 yards on every snap. They do not play press coverage. The Bucks. The Bucks have played soft as well, and there's some injuries in the secondary there. So I think that could be maybe an exploitable matchup with some injured corners and some more zone from Todd Bowles' group. But without Cooper Kupp, it is a little bit scary. But I hear you. And then one fantasy or DFS mention, Chris Godwin. The Rams have been great in the slot this year. They did get Troy Hill back healthy finally, but they've been a little bit susceptible there. If maybe Jalen Ramsey is shadowing a Mike Evans, maybe he's not, and maybe he's in the slot against Chris Godwin. Right. So I guess kind of a gamble there. But I like Godwin more than Evans, in this matchup.
Next up, the Chiefs, we mentioned this earlier, favored by 12.5 points over the Titans. That is in Kansas City. Point total 45.5. No super notable fantasy injuries for the Chiefs, though it does seem like Kadarius Toney will play in this game. For the Titans, Derrick Henry was resting on Thursday, and quarterback Ryan Tannehill was limited on Wednesday, but then did not practice on that ankle injury on Thursday. We've mentioned before, Ryan Tannehill, very tough quarterback, plays through a lot of injuries. The Titans won last week with Malik Willis, but Malik Willis only threw 10 passes and had an interception in that game. So I think that they would certainly like to have Ryan Tannehill back in this game, but we'll just kind of have to wait to see what Mike Vrabel has to say about all of that. But yeah, Chiefs favored by 12.5 points against a team that is in first place in the AFC South.
Yeah, the funny thing, too, is last season, this matchup is the only game in Patrick Mahomes' career where the team did not score a touchdown. It was a 27-3 beatdown by Tennessee, which scares me a little bit because I love the Chiefs otherwise. Tannehill's lack of mobility with that ankle injury that clearly is still a problem. Chris Jones is our highest graded interior defender in the NFL so far this year, has been a true game wrecker. And, Ben Jones is a good center for Tennessee, but also playing through an injury. Yeah. They have some susceptibility there in the interior. Otherwise, their tackles are not great, so maybe their edge rushers can have a better performance than they've had. You look at almost every matchup, and I think it's in favor of the Kansas City Chiefs. Right. The bet I'll do here instead of laying the 12.5 points is it's not out yet, but Patrick Mahomes' passing touchdowns I think will probably be 2.5 touchdowns, and that'll be plus money if it is 2.5 touchdowns. Mm-hmm. I like that a lot because we also talk about the scripted plays, the first 15 plays on offense for each team. Tennessee is excellent. They're one of the best teams in the NFL at that first drive scoring points, and then it kind of goes off the rails from there. But maybe they get an early lead, which forces Mahomes to throw the ball even more. And I think that is, a great bet. Jeffrey Simmons, hard to run against, on the interior for Tennessee. So I like that bet a lot.
Absolutely. All right. Last matchup here on Monday night. We'll get more into this on Monday night show, but Ravens favored by 2.5 points in New Orleans against the Saints. Point total 48 in this game. For the Ravens, Mark Andrews dealing with knee and shoulder injuries, was not practicing on Thursday. Rashod Bateman, like we said, on injured reserve. Gus Edwards was not practicing today with that hamstring injury, so could be Kenyon Drake at running back for Baltimore. For New Orleans, Michael Thomas on IR with that foot injury. Running back Mark Ingram was not practicing with a knee injury, and wide receiver Jarvis Landry was limited with an ankle injury. I do like the Ravens in this game, but that point total seems a little bit high at 48. I know the Saints have been able to move the ball. I know that they've had some issues there at cornerback, though they were able to shut out the Raiders on Sunday. So I guess you don't totally know which Saints defense is going to show up in this game, but I probably would lean a little bit more towards the under in this game.
Yeah, the interesting thing is for the second week in a row, the Saints are a home underdog, a small home underdog. Obviously, last week they won 24-0 against the Raiders. The Ravens have a much, much better offensive line. It's actually like maybe the best pass blocking offensive line in the NFL, or certainly up there. So that's a major difference. But yeah, it's interesting to me. I think the Saints, they have a good run defense. Obviously, Lamar is a different component, but great linebackers and Pete Werner and Demario Davis. If they need to maybe spy Lamar, they're probably better suited at doing that than most teams have in the NFL. I don't know. I see a lot for the New Orleans. I'm not going to bet it. I loved them last week, and I bet them against the Raiders, but I'm not going to bet it. But the Ravens go from a Thursday to a Monday, so almost a full bye week for them, which I think is huge with all the injuries they have, Mark Andrews' shoulder and all that. I hear you. I think the under is probably a smart play because it could be some running for Baltimore without the receivers. With no receivers, like we talked about for a while. And then New Orleans, they're not. Andy Dalton's not going to be firing, against the Baltimore Ravens the entire game. So I think I see it the same way there too.
All right. What is let's get into best bets. Do you have a best bet for the weekend coming up here?
Yes. So it's one I alluded to. It is a teaser with the Jaguars and the Seattle Seahawks. You get the Jaguars up to 7.5, the Seahawks up to 8 on a 6-point teaser. I think even if they do lose these games, Arizona, why would we trust them to win by more than a touchdown against anyone? And the Raiders, the same. They could win this game. They could be extremely motivated, even though Jacksonville's also 2-6 and has lost 6 one-score games. That's the thing, though. They've lost 6 times, always by 1 score. So I like that. Both of them over a touchdown. I like that bet a lot.
I don't know. I like the Jaguars at plus 1.5 in that game against the Raiders. I know, I feel crazy saying this, but I like the Panthers at plus 7.5 in Cincinnati. Cincinnati was just so bad last week, and I don't think it's necessarily sustainable for the Panthers to keep playing this well with PJ Walker, but they have at least shown more life now with Steve Wilkes as their head coach than they did with Matt Rule there. So I just feel like that game is a little bit closer than 7.5 points, even though that is in Cincinnati. And with the point total as low as it is at 42.5, I think it could wind up being a low-scoring game that the Bengals don't necessarily win and cover by over 7 points in this game. So I would probably go with the Panthers at 7.5. I could see the Bengals winning by a touchdown or less in that game. But I think that will do it for today's edition of PFF Wire. We will be back with you guys again on Monday. Make sure to download the PFF app in your app store. Make sure to subscribe to PFF Plus. That is $79.99 a month. Subscribe to the PFF Wire podcast. There are links down below. There we go. In the description for Apple and Spotify. Follow Brad on Twitter at PFF_Brad. Follow me on Twitter at Doug Kyed. And once again, thank you guys for joining us. And we will be back with you guys on Monday around 4 p.m.
Hopefully I answer.